Sovereignty. It's a word we hear all the time, right? And we kind of feel like we know what it means. Ultimate authority, the supreme power of a nation. Seems pretty simple. But what if I told you that this huge, foundational idea of our world is actually a paradox? That it's somehow both totally essential and basically meaningless at the same time? Let's really get into it. An ancient Hindu text gives us this really stark, even brutal warning. The king eats the people. And that's not just, some poetic line. It cuts right to the chase, to the raw and often dangerous relationship between rulers and the people they rule. It's the core tension of sovereignty itself.
So yeah, that leads us to the big question. What is sovereignty, really? I mean, it's got to be more than just a flag or a seat at the UN. The real answer, as we're about to see, is a fascinating story of power, recognition, and a paradox that literally shapes the fate of nations.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we've got to talk about something called the sovereignty paradox.
Okay, so here's the deal. On the one hand, for more than 200 years, sovereignty has been the absolute bedrock of global politics. But on the other hand, a lot of political scientists will tell you the word is so blurred and indistinct that it's pretty much useless for any real analysis. So how can that be? How can something be both the cornerstone of our world and a meaningless idea?
And check this out. This chart just lays the puzzle right out for us. It shows how often the word sovereignty popped up in books since the year 1800. And just look at that line. It is a constant, steady presence in how we talk about politics. It's like we're obsessed with this word, but we can't even agree on what it means. It's wild.
All right, so how do we make sense of this mess? Well, the key, it turns out, is to stop thinking of sovereignty as a thing a country has, like a possession, and start seeing it as a set of relationships.
A much more useful way to think about sovereignty is that first, it's relational. It's all about how different groups see each other. Second, it's what's called intersubjective, which is just a fancy way of saying it only exists because we all kind of agree it does. It's a shared idea. And third, it's historical, because that shared agreement can and does change a lot over time.
And really, you can boil it all down to just two key relationships. First, there's the internal one. This is the dynamic between a ruler and the people they rule. Do the people actually accept that ruler's authority? And then you've got the external dimension. That's the relationship between that ruler and all the other rulers out there in the world. Do other countries recognize them as legit?
Okay, and this is where things get really cool. Because when you take those two dimensions, that internal recognition and the external recognition, and you put them together, you get this incredibly powerful new way of seeing things that shows us there are actually 4 different faces of rule.
All right, first up, the one we all know. A ruler is recognized by their own people and they're recognized by other rulers around the world. What do we call that? Well, that's your classic sovereign state, right? Think France or Japan. This is sovereignty working just like we expect it to.
But what if you have a ruler who is clearly in charge and their people recognize their authority, but the rest of the world just pretends they don't exist? A place like Somaliland comes to mind. They've got a government, they have internal control, but they're missing that crucial external recognition from other countries.
Now, let's flip that on its head. What if other countries say, yep, that's the government, but that government has no real power, no real authority with its own people? This is often what we're talking about when we say failed state. The government exists on paper and in diplomatic circles, but not really on the ground.
And for our last box, what happens when an outside power comes in and rules over a group of people who completely reject their authority? There's no internal recognition of the ruler, and there's no external recognition of any local leader. That, my friends, is the textbook definition of a colony.
So here it is. This table puts it all together, perfectly laying out the 4 possibilities we just talked about. And what's so important here is that the sovereign state, the one we think of as normal, is actually just one of 4 possible outcomes. This framework suddenly helps us make sense of all those things in world politics that seem like weird exceptions, from unrecognized states to governments in exile.
Now, to see just how powerful this way of thinking is, let's use it to look at a real-world case, the tragic, complicated story of Haiti's impossible search for true sovereignty.
So it all starts in 1804. Haiti achieves internal sovereignty in the most incredible way imaginable, the world's first successful slave rebellion, a truly heroic moment. But the world's powers, the other rulers, refuse to grant them external recognition.
France only agreed in 1825, and only after demanding a crushing amount of money for their lost property. And by property, they meant the people they had enslaved. It's just unbelievable. And this horrible pattern just kept going, with dictators like the Duvaliers getting that external recognition from foreign powers, even as their own people suffered under their brutal rule.
And you know, the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, he saw this tragedy unfolding. He captured it perfectly back in 1893. He looked at Haiti and saw a country with all the potential in the world to be great, but instead it was trapped in what he called a labyrinth of social misery. And that misery was a direct result of this paradox of its sovereignty, having won it at home, but being denied it by the rest of the world.
So what's the big picture here? What does all this really mean? It means we have to seriously rethink one of the most foundational ideas of our world.
Okay, so if you take away one thing, it should be this. Sovereignty isn't something a country has. It's a constant push and pull between these different relationships. And as we saw with Haiti, internal legitimacy and external recognition can be in direct conflict. In fact, sometimes when a ruler gets more and more support from outside powers, they actually become less accountable to their own people. And that creates this incredibly dangerous tension that can literally cause a state to break down from the inside.
And that leaves us with a pretty big, and honestly a kind of unsettling question. Our entire international system is built on this idea of the sovereign state. But if that very idea isn't a solid thing at all, but a bundle of contradictions and paradoxes, well, how stable can our world order ever truly be?